Ancient Sith and Other Monsters. =RK=. Part 5. Republic Station Pillar of the Fallen. High orbit above Tython. Kira Carson was observing her apprentice dueling against two younger Padawans in the training hall, when she felt a disturbance in the Force. That by itself wasn't a notable event. They were above Tython after all, and the planet below them was becoming a death world racked by Force storms. No, it was a sudden surge of anger and a hint of a presence she had felt before, that made the Jedi stop and take notice. Kira closed her eyes and concentrated. The world around her became distant when she let the Force flow through her. The Jedi Master gasped. All she could feel was fury, directed at her own person. The dark side was practically boiled, and what felt like a tidal wave made of its very substance was approaching. Kira fell to her knees and struggled to breathe. The sheer presence she felt was simply suffocating. Master. The Padawans had ceased their training and ran up to her. I'm all right, Dini. Kira gave a wan smile to her pupil, then her features became serious. Prepare yourselves. A great darkness is coming. The Jedi Master grabbed the offered hand of her Padawan and arose to her feet. She used the Force to activate her comm and contact the station's commander. Captain Harris, we're about to have uninvited visitors. Battle stations. All Jedi and security personnel, prepare to repel boarders. Send a distress signal. We'll probably need help. Kira ordered. What are your orders, Master? Dini asked. The Jedi Master looked her Padawan in the eyes. The Zabrak girl was so sure that Kira knew what to do and could do no wrong. She smiled fondly at her student. Be careful. I'm almost positive that there are Sith coming. Go augment the defense forces. I'll grab my armor and meet you in the hangar. Sith? Here and now? Dini exclaimed. Her green eyes widened comically. That's what I sense. Don't play heroes, that goes for you all. I'll engage the Sith. Kira ordered firmly. As you wish, Master. The teenagers agreed without a hint of protest. Good. Let's go. Kira nodded and sprinted towards the door. Moments later she was heading down the outer ring of the mushroom-shaped station, which was the most direct way to her quarters. She was passing around a row of windows showing countless twinkling stars and a small part of Tython's South Pole, when a tremor through the Force made her look up. Nothing happened for a heartbeat, then at least a kilometer-long cruiser exited hyperspace dangerously close to the station. That presence, the Sith, they were on that ship. Kira stumbled when she sensed it properly. Veil. The Jedi Master hissed. Any thought about getting into her armor was forgotten. The warship's cannons rotated and aimed at the station. Sirens screamed and the hallway was illuminated by blinking red lights. Then the cruiser opened fire and blue iron bolts slammed into the station before its shields could come online. The Jedi Master was pretty sure that they were out of commission now. The deck below Kira shuddered and she grabbed the wall to keep herself on her feet. The ship outside shifted vector to interpose its armored belly between the pillar's guns and its hangars, then it began disgorging squadrons of fighter and bombers followed by landing craft. Kira swore and sprinted towards the hangar. =RK=. Hangar Bay C. Republic Station Pillar of the Fallen. High orbit above Tython. Dini Strum met a squad of soldiers on her way to the hangars and joined them in sprinting that way. The young Zabrak was both excited and frightened by the prospect of engaging in a real combat for the first time. She had been just assigned to Master Carson when their task force encountered an anomaly in hyperspace and ended in this strange and terrible future. From what Dini learned, there was still a republic, which controlled most of known space. Yet that state had precious little in common with the republic she and everyone in the fleet had sworn to protect. All it took was a cursory scan on the holonet to see it. This republic was a corrupt, barely working mess. It was the corpse of a dead beast was taking its last inefficient breath. That made the remnants' course pretty simple. They covertly joined the forming Confederacy of Independent Systems and prepared to tear down the abomination using the name of their proud nation. Well, the Jedi Knights and the military did so. For the support personnel and the Padawans, the last few years were quite boring, just training and making sure that the fleet was not only properly supplied and repaired but upgraded with modern technology too. The Padawan led the soldiers into the hangar and looked around. There were a handful of shuttles and fighters, nothing that would be really useful unless they had to flee, which was impossible. With Master Carson on board, the Sith would be dispatched in a short order. Dini just knew it. Her teacher was one of the most powerful and experienced Jedi in the whole Jedi Order. A handful of Sith, especially the weak imposters of this era, would pose no challenge. The Padawan was sure of it. "Take cover and set up the heavy weapons," the Jedi ordered. She glanced at the troopers and smiled. They were already doing so. The two heavy weapons specialists were headed towards a row of heavy durasteel crates, with the rest spreading out to cover the rest of the hangar. "Dini, I'm at Hangar A. It's quiet so far," Padawan Milo Chris, a fellow Zabrak, reported. "I'm on my way to B." Trinyorth announced a moment later. He was the youngest of the trio, a 14-year-old human with a fierce temperament and a wild shoulder-length brown hair that tried to match his disposition. "Defense teams, be advised, enemy landing craft are inbound. The defense grid is crippled and our shield is down. Prepare to repel boarders. The QRF is committed. You have to buy our security personnel enough time to arm and armor themselves," Captain Harris announced. "This is Padawan Strum. I hear you loud and clear, sir. We'll keep them busy for as long as possible." The words were barely out of Dini's mouth, when the Force warned her of immediate danger. "Take cover." The Jedi shouted and threw herself behind a stack of crates, before then used her powers to create a telekinetic shield around herself. It wasn't a moment too soon. Something hit the hangar doors and turned them into half-molten shrapnel that scythed through the compartment. Large pieces crippled the fighters, but only dented the bulkier and armored shuttles. A large object tore its way through what remained of the doors, then slammed into the side of one of the transport. The sound of shearing and grinding metal made the Padawan wince. Dini jumped on her feet and looked at the devastation. Her timely warning had saved the soldiers. She could feel that only one was wounded, but the rest were all right. The hangar looked like a war zone, which she guessed it was now. The Padawan drew her lightsaber and looked at the ship that forced its way in. Its rear ramp opened with a screech and two spheres flew out. They detonated a moment later, obscuring the assault shuttle within fast-expanding clouds of smoke. The Padawan didn't need eyes to see the intruders. They were sprinting out of the ship and spreading out in a search for cover. Unfortunately, whatever was in that smoke was good enough to prevent the soldiers' visors from piercing it. They opened blind fire, which Dini knew wouldn't hit a thing unless by sheer luck. This couldn't be allowed to stand. She gave out a war cry and charged the enemy. The Padawan deflected two blaster bolts that flew too close for comfort, before using the force to grab a nearby enemy and throw him at the ceiling with bone-crushing force. Then Dini jumped through the smoke and landed in front of another intruder and impaled him on her blade. It quickly became obvious that the concealment worked both ways. She was able to dispatch 6 soldiers, before the rest were aware she was among them. "Griff. A Jedi? They've got a Jedi?" A trooper clad in what Dini knew to be this era's Republic standard armor shouted. He tried to shoot her, but she simply sent his shots back at him. They burned through his shield and armor alike, killing the man. "We're on it. Just keep their soldiers off our backs," a deep voice boomed. Dini glanced at where the sound came from and thanked to the Force, she could make out 3 men and a woman advancing towards her. They had sheathed their blasters and instead pulled out vibroblades. The Padawan frowned at that. She tried to crush the one she thought was the leader, yet his armor resisted her efforts. She pushed harder and the man slowed his approach. He grunted and struggled against her telekinetic hold. Dini was about to channel even more energy in her telekinesis, however a sense of imminent danger made her jump back. The 2 mounted flamethrowers wielded by the other men came to life and came too close to engulfing the Padawan in liquid fire. The flames pushed the smoke away and Dini saw who she was facing. The general design of the armor was recognizable even if it had evolved in the last few thousand years. The 4 Mandalorians the Padawan faced gave out war cries of their own and charged her. Dini cursed and dashed her right, when an enemy trooper tried to shoot her in the back, which gave the quartet just enough time to reach her. She parried a slash, ducked under a thrust and had to retreat when another torrent of liquid fire was unleashed upon her. This time she wasn't nearly fast enough and the cape of her armored robes was caught by the flames. She briefly glanced at the soldiers she led here, but they were busy trading shots with the rest of the intruders. =RK=, Hangar Baby. Republic Station Pillar of the Fallen. High orbit above Tython. Trinyorth was the odd one out among the Padawans being trained on the station. For example, he was the only one who didn't come with them from the past and that was a concept he still struggled with even when saw proof about it. More importantly, the human youth shouldn't have been able to train to be a Jedi. He didn't have the Force until a couple of years ago when he met Master Jared and was given an offer he couldn't possibly refuse. Trin was a trader's son from a sparsely populated world in the Outer Rim. Life as a kid had been good, up until his father's ship had been seized by a Republic patrol for contraband, which wasn't really true. His dad and his clients simply refused to pay the back-breaking tariffs that the Senate had leveled over their home sector. His father lost his ship and things went downhill for the Yorth family. A couple of very tough years followed those events, and the only light in the tunnel were some people from the Confederacy who wanted to hire his dad's service. That's how he first met Master Jared, while he helped his dad on a transport course for the Jedi. A malfunction in the hyperdrive that made them limp at sublight for a week before being rescued gave Trin an opportunity to talk with Master Jared. He still didn't know why the Jedi made him the offer. Perhaps it was because the hatred he held towards the Republic and everything it did to the colonies. Perhaps it was because of his childhood dream to be a Jedi. In the end, Trin didn't really care. The Jedi Master made the offer, he accepted, and a month later he was through a place called the Valley of the Jedi. An amazing place that awoke the Force in Trin. Even now, 2 years later, the Padawan couldn't really put into words what exactly happened. All he knew for sure was that at one moment he was just ordinary old Trin, then it felt like he had been a blind and deaf cripple who could suddenly see the world for the first time. Sensing the Force, feeling it flow through him, being trained how to harness it. After all that, Trin was Master Jared's man through and through. That's why the very thought that someone dared attack this place, a station under his master's protection, infuriated the young Padawan. He was determined to prove that he was worthy of the gifts Jared had given him. All thoughts of glorious success were thrown out of Trin's head when something crashed into the station and he struggled to remain on his feet. The Padawan could hear explosions coming from the nearby hangars and he still hadn't reached the one he was supposed to protect. "Follow me," Trin shouted and ran faster. A louder crash sounded from just around the corner and the following tremor did throw him off his feet. The Padawan cursed. He was too late. Trin got up and sprinted into the hangar and paid no attention to the soldiers behind him. When he turned the corner, he faced devastation. The fighters parked into the hangar were all destroyed. The only relatively intact ship was a large shuttle, which appeared to have blasted its way in. Its ramp was down and armored men and women were disembarking. The Padawan grabbed his lightsaber and activated it. He was going to stop those people. Trin charged the intruders, then abruptly stopped when his feet refused to move forward. He was staring at the armored figure that was leading the assault. The Padawan recoiled at the sticky cloud of fury and loathing surrounding that man. It was like the dark side itself was manifesting and destroying Trin's courage. The young human clutched his saber in both hands and held it in front of the approaching monster as if it could ward off the darkness. Trin felt cold. He knew that this was his death approaching and it terrified him. It also made him angry. That emotion was enough to awake his frozen courage. The Padawan snarled and charged the man. A lightsaber appeared in the monster's hand and activated mid-swing. It battered Trin's blade with contemptuous ease, and before the Padawan could react, the crimson saber burned through his chest armor and seared his lungs. It wasn't fair. He finally had everything he ever dreamed of, the Padawan thought. Trin looked down at the blade impaling his chest and frowned. Wasn't this supposed to hurt? The lightsaber pulled out and suddenly Trin was on the ground looking up at a headless corpse. His vision grew dark and darkness claimed him. =RK Part 6. Hangar Baby. Republic Station Pillar of the Fallen. High orbit above Tython. No. Trin. A female voice shouted. I could feel the woman's anguish and it was like fine glass of brandy. A friend of yours, Kira? I taunted while examining her. Carson wore a set of robes similar to those once upon a time favored by Satul Shan. The Jedi Mater looked older, more tired than I remembered. For a moment I wondered how long she had been in this age, then dismissed the thought. I would figure it out eventually. The Jedi was followed into the hangar by 5 power-armored soldiers. Their outfit was familiar, it was the same overall design like the samples recovered from the unknown that engaged one of my units on Naboo during the search for the younglings. That explained much. I've been wondering for some time how the timeline could go to hell so fast. It was now obvious I had help in that regard. Vale, Carson spat my name as if it was the vilest of curses. At your service, my dear. My My, what a curious company you have. Terrorism, war crimes, you've been busy. I nodded at the soldiers behind her. The irony was delicious. How the mighty had fallen, their exploits were almost worthy of Sith. That's rich coming from a monster like you. The Jedi snapped. I'll deal with my old acquaintance. You know your orders. Keep safe, Bo. I nodded at my wife and raised my hands. The old Republic troopers were lifted in the air under my will despite their force-resistant armor, then I held them at the back of the hangar with enough force to make sure they wouldn't be an issue ever again. Kira pulled out her favored double-bladed lightsaber and ignited its emerald blades. You shall not pass. The Jedi Master hissed. You know, I've been here for a whole year now. Ever since I found myself in the future, I've had to hold back or risk freaking the natives enough that they would go after me as a too great a threat. I gave her a chilling smile. I've had resigned myself that my vengeance would remain unfulfilled. Yet, here we are. Where is that worthless husband of yours, Kira? I asked and charged her. I could no longer keep my fury at bay. Nor did I want to. The dark side draped itself over me like a lover and I let myself go. Our blades met and I used a telekinetic push to throw her out of the way. The Jedi countered expertly and the only effect my attack had was buffering her robes with a bit of displaced air. Kira glared venomously at me. The debris all around us rose in the air under her control and she sent them all my way. I laughed and froze them within a stasis field, then pushed back the Jedi Master and released a torrent of Sith lighting at her. She caught it on her blade, yet the attack staggered her for a moment. I took advantage of that and jumped on the offensive and pushed her yet farther away from the exit. Bo and my guards sprinted out and went in search of their objectives. I've been looking up to this moment for years, Kira, I hissed to the Jedi Master. The Force jumped to obey my will. A cloud of dark miasma formed around me and flew at the Carson. The Jedi jumped out of the way and staggered when I pressed against her mental shields. She shook her head and glared after fending my attempt to drive her insane. The Jedi Master retaliated by forming a ball of pulsing energy around her left hand and throwing it my way. I shielded myself with the Force and it was my turn to stagger when the sphere detonated and tried to disintegrate me. My defense held and I laughed in joy. I didn't even know how much I missed facing a worthy opponent. I'll almost regret gutting the bitch. Carson threw a bunch of debris my way to conceal her next attack, an attempt to catch me into a stasis field. I simply drew on the dark side and blasted away the projectiles before collapsing her technique. My turn, I exclaimed joyfully and released an omnidirectional telekinetic pulse. Kira released one in turn, but my attack was just a distraction to buy me a couple of seconds. The dark side sang around me as I drank deeply from her poisoned well. The power flowing through me lifted my body off the ground while I channeled that energy into a lighting storm I unleashed at the Jedi Master. This wasn't an attack that could be countered by something as simple as a lightsaber blade. Tendrils of purple lighting slashed from both the deck and ceiling. They picked up pieces of shattered metal as a mere side effect and turned half the hangar into a web of dancing energy. Carson fell on her knees and raised her lightsaber in a horizontal position, using it as a focus to create a spherical shield around her body. Lighting struck it again and again. The woman screamed when her defense flickered and pseudo-electricity arched all over her body. Yet, the shield held until my attack was spent. Kira was on her knees, panting with wisps of smoke rising from her robes. I landed lightly on my feet and took a deep breath. The attack took more of me than it should have, though I was very far from spent. Is that all you've got, Sith? The Jedi Master spat and got up. I haven't started yet, Jedi, I snapped at her and sent a jolt of lighting her way. Kira danced away from my attack, then tried to lift me in the air. I released a pulse of raw force energy and shattered her grip before it could properly form before retaliating in kind by trying to choke her. The Jedi Master gasped, but managed to break my hold almost immediately. She snarled at me. I felt her attempt to crush my mind. Kira's attack clawed at my mental shields and gave me a mild headache, before I could shake it off. I retaliated in kind and leveled the power of the dark side against her mind. Carson fell on her knees and screamed as I battered her mental defenses. I could see her crying bloody tears, before she roared and drew deeply from the dark side. That gave her strength enough to survive my onslaught with her sanity more or less intact. Kira got up and glared at me with her yellow eyes. I cackled. So much for the Jedi's vaunted restraint. I waved her to come at me. I wanted to tear her apart with my own hands. Kira closed her eyes for a moment. She was enveloped by an energy field made by the Force, which practically made her glow thanks to my connection with our power. I did the same, using the dark side, and an armor made of living shadows manifested over me. The Force invigorated me, it made me faster, stronger than humanly possible. I was sure Kira was doing the same. We stared at each other for a long moment. I grinned and charged. RK equals. Hangar Bay C. Republic Station Pillar of the Fallen. High orbit above Tython. I felt desperation raise its ugly head. The 4 Mandalorians were acting like a well-oiled machine. The moment she got any kind of advantage against one of their number, the rest redoubled their efforts and pushed her back. The troopers were pinned down by enemy fire and could offer her no help either. The Padawan almost got herself killed when she felt Trindai and stumbled. It was sheer dumb luck, or perhaps the Force throwing her a bone. That's the only way Strum could explain why she was still alive. Instead of gutting her, the Mandalorian she was facing at that moment didn't expect her mistake and missed her gut by a hair. She had to roll away from the woman, who tried to torch her, only to stumble next to one of the men. A desperation-fueled telekinetic push shoved his blade away before it could split her skull open. I parried another slash, then barely dodged a thrust, only to find herself in the way of an armored boot that caught her in the ribs and sent her tumbling on the deck. Her armor blunted the kick enough to keep her ribs from cracking, but she would still feel it in the morning, provided she was still alive to feel anything, a prospect that was looking less and less likely by the minute. I rolled over the debris-littered floor away from a flamethrower blast and got on her feet in time to meet the next attack. Then the Force smiled upon her. A security squad dashed into the hangar and immediately opened fire. They caught one of the Mandalorians attacking the Padawan off guard, and their concentrated fire burned through his shields and armor before he could react. The others wasted no time and rolled away towards the closest cover. "No, you don't," I snarled. She levitated a piece of a fighter wing and slammed it into one of the men. The Mandalorian was sent skidding over the deck, right in the open where the troopers blasted him apart. The Padawan was about to repeat the trick when she felt Milo die too. The shock staggered her and she reacted too late when one of the enemies sent a burst in her side. Her deflector and armor took the brunt of the attack, however the last shot had enough energy to burn through. I screamed like a damned soul when molten alloy fused itself to her ribs. It was only thanks to the adrenaline flooding her veins and the Force enhancing her body that she was able to remain conscious and crawl away to the friendly position. Denny crashed behind a stack of metal crates next to the heavy weapon specialists and whimpered. One of the soldiers slapped a med pack on her neck and flooded her bloodstream with stimulants. The jolt made the Padawan shudder and cleared her mind. She closed her eyes and used the Force to soothe her wound. While she wasn't good enough to heal her injury in a short order, I still knew enough to numb it and make sure she wouldn't hurt herself even more while moving. "This is Captain Harris. We lost Hangar A. Jedi Master Carson is engaging a Sith in B and needs immediate assistance. Be advised we have at least half a platoon worth of enemy troops loose in the station. Security teams converge on the hangars, engineering and command center." I glanced over the crates. Security had the enemy here contained. "I'm going to help my master. Keep them bottled in until reinforcements arrive." The Padawan shouted and stumbled towards the exit. RK equals. Hangar Bay B. Republic Station Pillar of the Fallen. High orbit above Tython. Kira felt at least couple of decades younger. The Force sang to the Jedi Master as it flowed through her body. The world around her was sharper, clearer. Her injuries were soothed and she felt powerful beyond measure. The Jedi Master inhaled slowly and stared at Vale. The maniac was enjoying this. A sense of determination filled her. That Sith had caused too much suffering and death to be allowed to win. He was here, in front of her, and Kira was going to be damned before she let him get away. A heartbeat later, they both exploded in motion. A Jedi and a Sith met in the center of the hangar. They were surrounded by wrecked ships, glowing debris and a corona of metal hanging within a stasis field. Somehow that little taste of hell felt appropriate for the stage of their battle. Kira spun around, becoming a whirlwind of death. Her blade was alive in her hands, eager to bite into her old nemesis. The damned Sith was laughing and meeting her hit for hit. Their sabers met with such a force that each hit emitted blinding flash of light, yet the combatants were not bothered by the light show. The Jedi Master deflected a slash aimed to literally disarm her, then spun in place by using the Force to tremendously increase her speed. Her blade flashed and battered aside Vale's saber, then she finished her spin by kicking the man in the head with enough force to give an ordinary human a concussion. The Sith simply shook his head and laughed. He was upon her a moment later. Kira let everything but the battle fade from her mind. There was only the Sith in front of her and defeating him. Strike, parry, riposte, deflect, dodge, rinse and repeat. The Jedi Master was lost in her blade work and trusted the Force to warn her about any nasty surprises. She needed something more. An opening. A chance. Kira let dive deeper and deeper in the Force. She knew that the Force was with her. It was stronger than the dark side, that was a well-known fact. Yet, she couldn't find an opening. Vale made no mistakes. The Jedi Master snarled in frustration. She needed more power. She had to win and end the madman here and now. Kira needed power. She was growing angry and frustrated. And the dark side answered her call. The Jedi Master felt a surge of power. Her strikes rained faster, hit harder. Vale was pushed back a step then another. Kira smiled at the Sith. Surely this was it. She was going to win now. The bastard laughed in glee. He placed his feet firmly on the deck and refused to take a single step back. His own speed increased to match her. His attacks gained additional power. The deck below them trembled each time their blades met. Kira snarled and grasped for yet more power. She could feel Vale doing the same and her desperation to win increased. Each strike sent shockwaves through the hangar. The frozen debris were freed and a moment later flew away with enough velocity to dent the thick bulkheads. The deck itself protested under the abuse and rang like a gong. Yet, it wasn't enough. Kira roared in defiance. She felt the Force answering her call and flooding her with even more of its essence. The Jedi Master felt her body tremble and struggle to contain the energy, yet it was worth it. She had never felt such power before. Kira glared at the Sith and simply willed him to die. Vale shook as the Force itself pressed upon him in an attempt to squash him like a bug. He roared in joy and tried to do the same to her. They were both enveloped by enough Force energy to become visible to even the blind. The Jedi Master screamed because of the strain she was under, screamed her fury and determination for the whole galaxy to hear. She wrestled the Force surrounding her and trusted at Vale like a battering ram. That should have been it. She just knew it. Yet, the Sith did the same and Kira had to struggle to contain the energy gathering between them. The two lances of pure Force condensed into a sphere which soon became blinding. Kira's eyes widened and she jumped back in a Force-assisted leap. The Jedi Master did her best to shield herself, because she knew what was coming. The area where their attacks met destabilized and all that energy detonated like a bomb. Kira was caught in midair and knew that was it. She couldn't muster enough power fast enough to cushion her impact. Yet, the bone-shattering crash into a bulkhead didn't materialize. Kira opened her eyes in confusion, then smiled in gratitude. Dini stood at the entrance. She looked worse to wear, but the Padawan had somehow not only prevented her from slamming into the wall but shielded herself too. The much younger woman sprinted to her master's side and helped her up. "You did it, Master," Dini exclaimed in jubilation. "Did she?" a hated voice mocked. Kira's eyes widened and she looked up. Vale stood just a few meters away from the detonation. The deck in front of him was simply gone, a large chunk of it was disintegrated and the whole showed the ruin of the level below the hangar. While the Sith's armor appeared to be battered and the shadows that surrounded him like a second skin were gone, the man appeared unharmed. The Jedi Master took a stock of her situation. She gave everything she had, yet the Sith was undeterred. Kira grabbed her Padawan's shoulder and pulled herself up. "Dini, listen to me carefully. Get out of here and call evacuation. Find a shuttle and leave the system. Find Jared. This station is lost. I'll buy you as long as I can." "Master. We can't take him," Dini exclaimed in horror. "I can't leave you. We need to walk separate paths now, Padawan. Where I'm headed you should not follow for a long, long time." Kira smiled at the teen. "Dini, you still have your life in front of you. Don't waste it here, Master." Such a touching moment, Vale chuckled darkly. "Go girl, while I'm in a good mood. Go to Jared and tell the bastard I'll be waiting for him. Run now and tell him that his precious little wife died screaming." Dini gripped her lightsaber harder and glared at the Sith. Don't listen to him, Dini. Don't let him provoke you. Do this for me, my friend. Go. Kira squeezed her Padawan's shoulder. Master, Dini trailed off. There were tears in her eyes. I'll go. Here. The Padawan offered her lightsaber. Kira smiled fondly at her pupil and mouthed, go. The Jedi Master returned her attention to the Sith, who was circling around the hole in the deck. She ignited Dini's lightsaber and raised it in Sorisu stance. You want me, you bastard? Come and get me, Kira shouted. It will be my pleasure. Vale snarled and charged. Kira drew as much of the force as her battered body could handle. She was still faster and stronger than any human had a right to be. Would have put most cyborgs to shame. Vale was faster. Stronger. Even with the force, the Jedi Master had trouble following his blade. Only instinct born of decades on the battlefield let her survive the next few seconds. She only managed it by constantly falling back. It wasn't enough. The Sith's blood-colored blade bit into her left arm, making her gasp in pain. Kira moved to deflect the next strike, which was a feint. The crimson saber moved faster than her tired eyes could follow and sliced her left shoulder, making that arm useless. No. Not like this, Kira snapped. She simply refused to die like that, exhausted and cold, with an enemy who she was unable to at least cripple. Her emotions and pain gave ample fuel to the dark side, which eagerly answered her plea. Yet, the simple sad truth was that even with that power boost, her body was giving out. Kira went in a last-ditch desperate offensive. She met Vale strike for strike. Allowed herself to hope she could take him down with her. Then it was all over. Just like that. One moment Kira was attacking, then she stumbled back and stared dumbly at the stump where her right hand used to be. And so it ends. Vengeance is mine, Vale declared. Kira looked at the Sith and saw a torrent of purple lighting. Her nervous system lit on fire. The sheer viciousness of the attack pulled her off her feet and all she knew was agony. She felt her skin blacken, her organs slowly fry, yet there was no blessed oblivion. Only more pain than the human nervous system should be able to process. =RK equals. Hangar Baby. Republic Station Pillar of the Fallen. High orbit above Tython. Dini got out and called the station's commander. She knew that Captain Harris had been watching events unfold. He was aware what was happening. This is Captain Harris. All hands, head to the nearest shuttle or escape pod. I repeat, all hands, head to the nearest shuttle of escape pod. Security personnel are to slow down the enemy and evacuate last. The Padawan entered the hangar she tried to defend earlier and fell to her knees. She could feel her master screaming in agony. She could sense an echo of Kira's pain and that was enough to dazzle her. Master, Dini whispered. She looked back the way she came. That monster was torturing her master to death. All Dini wanted was to go back and help Kira even if she knew it was pointless. If a Jedi Master fell to the Sith, what chance she, a Padawan, had? Dini shook in helplessness and shame. To think that she believed the Sith of this age were easy to handle. How foolish. A blaster bolt flew past the Padawan's head and served to concentrate her mind. She looked around. The enemy were contained, yet that wasn't enough. The only thing Dini could do was to save the soldiers in here. She got up and snarled at the Sith's minions. They all had to die for following such a monster. Dini screamed in pain and fury then charged at the enemy. She didn't need a lightsaber. She had the Force. The Padawan felt like she was freezing, probably thanks to shock, and ignored the sensation. She raised a hand and an enemy soldier was lifted in the air, then crushed like a can. Dini threw another one against the wreck of a fighter and that man never moved again. Another was pulled in the sights of the Republic troopers only to reduce to slag and cooked meat. Push them back. Kill them. Dini furiously snapped. Her men obeyed and followed her into the fray. Only the remaining Mandalorian proved an obstacle for the furious assault. Dini glared at them, then picked the wreck of a fighter with her mind and threw it at them. The Padawan looked around and gasped for breath. She was sure at least a few of the bastards were still alive, but she didn't have time for them. We're taking their ship and getting away. After the firefight, the enemy shuttle was ironically the one most intact. Go. Dini pointed at their way out. =RK equals. Secure storage. Republic Station Pillar of the Fallen. High orbit above Tython. Deep in the bowels of the old Republic space station rested an ancient corpse protected by a stasis field. The coffin was made through alchemy to hold its occupant contained. Only the wild shifts in the currents of the force caused by the storms on the planet Bello allowed the occupant of that body to manifest for short periods of time. She did so right then and there. The shimmering force ghost of a short red-haired woman stood in front of the stasis pod that was her prison and smiled. Finally, after all those years, she was going to be free. Warning. Self-destruct sequence has been initiated. All personnel abandon ship. I repeat. You better hurry, apprentice, or I'll be haunting you to the grave and beyond. Darth Zash pouted. Ancient Sith and Other Monsters. =RK=. Part 7. Republic Station Pillar of the Fallen. High orbit above Tython. I want one of those. A Mandalorian ducked under a hail of blaster fire. Complete with Beskar plating. Grenade the bastards. Mix of frag and concussion. Bo ordered. She had led her unit about halfway to the presumed location of the command center when they ran into a makeshift barricade complete with a blaster cannon and 2 squads of power-armored soldiers. Half a dozen grenades tumbled down the corridor and detonated. The explosions filled most of the compartment with shrapnel and caught the enemy in their blast wave. The confines of the corridor enhanced the effects of the latter and ensured that the enemy were dazzled despite their power armor. Go, Bo snapped and activated her jetpack. She flew down the corridor and tackled a man in power armor, who was attempting to get back on his feet. Before he could recover, the Mandalorian woman leveled her wrist-mounted blaster at his visor and shot at it until she was sure he was dead. Her hand-picked warriors followed her example and either shot repeatedly at weak spots of the armor or used vibroblades as can openers. That went easier than expected. Bo-Katan frowned. Those jokers haven't faced proper Mandalorian warriors before. One of her men boasted. If they fought in the Great War like Mandalore did, then odds are they actually did. Bo shrugged. Those were probably second-rate garrison troops. She waved her men to continue the advance. They weren't here to have fun. They were less than 100 meters from the command center, engaging another defensive position, when the station's commander announced that he had activated the self-destruct. Smoke them, hit them with missiles then charge. We need to break through now, Bo hissed in annoyance. The soldiers they were facing this time were competent too. They had set up their position so that lobbing in grenades was going to be problematic without someone exposing themselves on withering fire. However, that was less of a problem for the missiles favored by the Mandalorians. After all, they were multi-purpose. From limited AA and anti-tank work to resolving this exact type of tactical challenges. Smoke grenades rolled around the corner towards the killing field and detonated, concealing their end of the corridor. Bo nodded and 2 of her men went low and immediately launched their missiles. One was unlucky and received multiple E-web rounds to the helmet, more than enough firepower to remove his head. His buddy however managed to duck out just in time. The bastards were canny, they swept low so they could be sure to hit someone pulling similar stunt. That didn't help them in the end. The 2 missiles detonated and blew holes in the barricade. Another pair of Mandalorians repeated the maneuver and finished demolishing the obstacle, then a third pair sent their missiles downrange. They followed them a moment later, using their jetpack. The rest of Bo's unit followed suit and they fell upon a squad of power-armored troops who were waiting for them. What followed was a short-lived vicious brawl complete with point-blank shots, stabbing vibroblades and an enemy coated from head to toe with liquid fire. The enemy went down hard and took with them 4 of Bo's people, with 2 more left as walking wounded. Set charges. She pointed at the armored blast door protecting the command center, then kicked one of the corpses. That particular bastard killed 2 of her men and wounded a third before a blade found its way under his left armpit. =RK=. Hangar Bay C. Republic Station Pillar of the Fallen. High orbit above Tython. Is everyone on board? Dini shouted from the cockpit. She was busy familiarizing herself with the controls. While they weren't what she was used to, the Padawan was pretty sure she could get them airborne and in hyperspace. We're in. The sergeant in charge of the troopers informed her. Strap in, this is going to be a bumpy ride. Dini closed her eyes and concentrated on the force. She needed to know where the enemy ships were. The Padawan knew she should keep the station between the shuttle and any unfriendly capitals or this was going to be one very short ride. It took her almost a minute to gather enough concentration and figure out what was happening outside, but she managed it. The force was with her. There was only one cruiser outside and it was circling around the other side of the station, probably taking out any of the weapon emplacements. Unfortunately, there were a lot of fighters out there. Deni's hands went to the nav computer and she began calculating course. She wanted it ready the moment she broke away from Tython's gravity well. The Padawan doubted she would be able to keep the shuttle intact any longer than that. The weight was nerve-wracking. Deni felt like slapping the damned computer hard before it finally announced its successful number crunching with an annoyingly loud beep. "Ready or not, we're leaving," the Padawan announced. The shuttle rose under her ministrations. The repulsors whined in protest, but worked well enough. Deni rotated the shuttle and aimed its nose at the jagged hole where the hangar door used to be and activated the engines. The small ship shot out at maximum acceleration and Padawan left the force guide her hand. A pair of enemy fighters flew past them but didn't engage. Deni smiled in relief because her hope that stealing the intruder's own shuttle would buy them precious seconds was vindicated. She flew towards the edge of the gravity well and paid no heed to the hails coming from the enemy cruiser. The shuttle's sensors detected multiple fighters vectoring their way. Now, it was race against time. The only option Deni had left was to maneuver once they came into range. Or not. Multiple missiles locked onto the shuttle and launched seconds later. "Come on," Deni prayed. "Just a bit longer." The missiles were swiftly gaining on her ride. The Padawan's hand hovered over the level that engaged the hyperdrive. The remaining seconds stretched into eternity. The missiles were coming closer and closer with every beat of her racing heart. The closest one was going to hit just about. Deni pulled the lever and for a brief moment she saw the optical illusion of the stars stretching away and then they were safe. She slumped in the pilot's seat and began shacking. The station was gone. Deni didn't know how many people made it off without being picked by the damn Sith. What she did know was who didn't make it. Her fellow Padawans were butchered like animals. Her master. Deni sobbed. She knew Kira was tortured to death. At least it was over relatively fast. She stopped feeling her master's agony a while ago. Not that it made what happened any better. == Command Center. Republic Station Pillar of the Fallen. High orbit above Tython. This is less than ideal, Bo stated. Once the doors were breached, they found just a handful of officers waiting for them. Unfortunately, none of them let themselves be captured alive and they had shot up the computer terminals. "I need options, people. We have about 6 minutes or so." The most technically savvy of the Mandalorians thought aloud. He was busy looking around until his eyes fell upon a map of the station. "I need to get to the reactor. You may wish to check the special storage over here, then make your way to the outer ring, blow up a bulkhead and take a spacewalk to be picked up if we didn't manage to stop the self-destruct." "You heard the man. Go, on the double," Bo ordered. "You're with me." She tapped the closest warrior on the arm and sprinted towards the exit. As it turned out, her dear husband had a similar idea. Bo and her comrade met him close to the storage compartment she planned to search. When she saw him, the Mandalorian woman halted her sprint. Del-Qatar was carrying over his shoulder what appeared to be a well-cooked corpse. I have no words. We'll be talking once we get out of here, mister." Bo gave her husband an exasperated look. "I can explain." Del-Qatar sounded very chipper. "Is this some Sith fetish I need to know about?" Bo grumbled. "No, just a useful bargaining chip." Del-Qatar raised his hand and clutched his fingers into a fist. The armored door of the storage compartment screeched as metal was crushed and torn apart by invisible force, then Mandalore simply pulled it away, revealing a dimly lit compartment full with various sealed crates. Bo saw a row of stasis pods resting at the far end of the large room. "Here, hold this." Del-Qatar ordered his guard and unceremoniously dropped the fried woman he carried in the warrior's hands. Then he strode briskly through the storage compartment until he reached one of the stasis pods. Bo followed her husband and frowned after looking at the pod that had his attention. "That's a man," she stated the obvious. "Not what Zash usually goes for, however gender doesn't matter to the rituals she favors." Del-Qatar shrugged. Then he used his powers to dismantle the pod and picked up the ancient-looking mummy inside. "Now we can get out of here." Bo cursed darkly. That man was going to drive her insane one of those days, and they were married for less than a month. "What are you waiting for?" Delkatar quipped over his shoulder and ran towards the exit. She cursed her husband again and ran after him. The warrior accompanying them laughed at the show and earned himself some nasty Hutt-esque curses too. =RK= Med Bay, Cruiser Remembrance, high orbit above Tython. That could have gone better. Much worse too. I summarized our little excursion. My people barely managed to get away from the station before it blew up, and we had to leave any survivors from one of our strike teams that was overrun in a hangar they targeted. We had to leave most of our dead behind too, yet it was worth it. While Bo's group was unable to stop the self-destruct, we retrieved Zash. The other unit got to the data core and downloaded some data, and we now knew who were the criffing bastards with power armor my people encountered on Naboo. The highly improbable presence of Old Republic personnel in this day and age helped explain some weird happenings, like the whole Naboo crisis, the infiltrators that hit the Jedi Temple using force-masking artifacts from the time of my empire. I smiled and looked at the Bacta tanks. While all of the above were important, what I was really happy about was that my vengeance was at hand. With Kira here, it was almost guaranteed that her wanker of a husband had found his way to the future too. Now the criffing bastard was going to experience what it was like to lose his wife. My smile grew wider as I stared at Kira's battered form. She was floating in a Bacta tank and wasn't going to be getting out on her own power, ever. I was going to either finish her soon, or if Zash agreed, be more creative. I hoped for the second option, that was going to drive Jared barking mad. You owe me an explanation, husband dearest. Bo removed her helmet and came to stand beside me. I do, don't I? I pointed at my captive. This is Jedi Master Kira Carson. She and her husband were among the biggest supporters of the retrieval mission that ended with my first wife's death. From what I tore away from some of their Jedi buddies, some really thought that they could simply kidnap Ashara. Others however knew that she would resist and fully expected her to be killed. It's vengeance then. Bo nodded. Don't mistake me, wife. If someone hurts you, I'll make sure the whole galaxy trembles at the very thought of sharing their fate. I turned to face Bo and cupped her cheek. Despite the sheer foolishness we had to face the last few weeks, they were the best I had in years. I leaned forward and caught her lips in a passionate kiss. Bo relaxed and came closer. You got married for a second time and didn't invite me? An unfamiliar voice sounded from behind me. Bo stiffened in my arms and I was sure she was ready to open fire with the weaponry built in her armor. I gently shook my head and turned around. Zash's mummified corpse was wide awake and examining us with yellow eyes. Its face was twisted into a sinister-looking smirk. You've looked better, former master of mine, I quipped. The Bacta surrounding Zash vibrated and transmitted her voice so it could be heard loud and clear. Huh? That was a neat trick. And you're just as ugly as I remember. She snipped back. Well, that explains your current meat suit. You did want me for my body after all. I snorted. At those words, my wife glared at Zash. Was that jealousy I felt coming from my wife? At least she was no longer pissed off at me. My fellow Sith Lord looked around. Her gaze fell on Kira and she chuckled. So you got her in the end. I'm surprised that you left her alive. Plan to taunt Jared? Zash asked. In a manner of speaking. I beamed at my former master. The way I see it, you kinda need a fresher body. One of a force sensitive too. I looked pointedly at Kira. Zash laughed. That's delicious bit of vengeance, apprentice, she exclaimed. Then frowned after examining my captive more closely. Did you have to do that much damage? Zash pouted. I had a lot of frustration to work through. I shrugged. Isn't that what she's for? Zash nodded at my wife and earned herself a withering glare, but Bo declined to be baited into a verbal response. My hand went up and slapped my face. I had to be careful with those two or they were going to kill each other or worse, me. How the criff did I forget how sharp was that woman's tongue? My wife looked at me. Are you sure you need her? She raised a hand and pointedly examined her wrist-mounted blaster. Oh, you I like, Zash chuckled. The stories I can tell you about that husband of yours. Thanks. I think. Bo sent a suspicious look at Zash. Damn it. My former master returned her attention to Kira. Are you sure this is the best you can do? She gave her best puppy crat hound eyes. For now. The way things are going, there would be some more Jedi volunteering in the next few years. I spoke darkly. That way the Criffing conservatives could be of some small utility. We all. Zash trailed off. It's been a long time since I had a Jedi Master. My hand went up on its own accord and I facepalmed again. I don't want to know. There's more than enough Jedi drama in my life thanks to Satine. Bo shook her head. Is her sister a Jedi? Zash asked. She married a Jedi Master and he got kicked out of the Order for it a few weeks ago. You have a Jedi family now. My condolences. You know very well Ashara was a Jedi and you liked her. I rolled my eyes. She was the exception that proved the rule. Besides, it was highly amusing to watch half the Dark Council bash their heads against a wall trying to convince that turning your wife was a splendid idea. After Jiza? I snorted. Well, she was delightfully unhinged, yet that didn't stop you from sticking it into the crazy. Zash, you're probably the only Sith woman I would call sane. And I'm one of the few Sith women you've met and haven't slept with. Hint, hint. Delkatar, if you prefer, I'm going to shoot off something you are going to really miss. Bo glared at me. I rescued you because? I glared at Zash. Because I'm your favorite Sith? She beamed at me. You're doing a great job of losing that title. Try again. I did promise you some information, didn't I? Besides, I have the sneaking suspicion you can use some help. Zash winked at my wife. You should know, dear. Your husband has this distressing tendency to find himself in heaps of trouble no matter how hard he tries to avoid it. I noticed, Bo said in an irritated tone. Bloody women, they were going to be the death of me. How about a little trade? You bring me up to speed and I'll tell you what I know while we prepare our little ritual. Zash frowned. Do you have the necessary artifacts or would we have to improvise? Getting you a new body wasn't on my to-do list when I came to rescue you. The hard way it is. You know I hate it. Zash grumbled. She glared at Kira, then at me. I'll need a new hand too. RK equals. Republic Base. Valley of the Jedi. Location classified. Jared Parian was busy overseeing the training of a company of shock troopers who were freshly imbued with the Force when he felt a tremor. His side project to see how good a Jedi someone who gained his powers through the Nexus could become was in distress. The Jedi Master could feel his Padawan's terror even through the depths between the stars. Continue practicing the kata. Jared ordered and headed to the comm center. Parian had taken just a few steps in that direction, when he felt his Padawan die. What the griff? He hissed and began cursing quietly in Huttes. The Jedi Master sent his mind wander through the Force and tried to divine what was happening while striding briskly to his destination. He ignored the salutes of the on-duty personnel, went to the closest terminal and tried to establish connection with the pillar. Meanwhile, what he felt made him apprehensive. The Force was in turmoil, not a real surprise. Ever since Vale came back from the dead, the dark side had been practically giddy. Jared's expression became thunderous when he was unable to get a channel to the station where his wife was. He ignored everything and closed his eyes. The Jedi Master plunged headfirst into the Force and sent his mind in search for Kira. It took him minutes of following their Force bond, but eventually he could experience what she felt. There was no mistaking it, Kira was engaged in mortal combat. Even from such a distance, Jared could feel the incredible amount of power his wife was channeling into the fight. He didn't dare deepen the connection in fear of disrupting her concentration in a critical moment. He simply felt her emotions and his distress grew by the second. The battle lasted for what felt like eternity. Kira fought like a woman possessed. All Jared wanted was to be there with her. To make sure she was safe. And to find who was pushing her to such lengths. Something changed. Even from such a distance, even without the Force bond, Jared would have felt the Force tremble when the fight escalated. The Jedi Master grit his teeth. There were precious few people in this age who could push his wife that far. Who was it? The Jedi's Grand Master? The Sith who used to control the Confederacy, or worst of all, Vale? Jared froze. For a moment the Force bond blinked off, before it re-established itself if weaker. He left a relieved sigh. For an instant he feared the worst. Then it got worse. He felt Kira's determination. Her resignation, and he knew. His wife gave the fight everything she had. And she was losing. Kira was going to go down. That sudden realization chilled Jared's heart. He felt Kira overcame despair. Felt her ally herself and throw everything she had left in one desperate offensive to bring her attacker down with her. Jared allowed himself to hope that the Force was with his wife. It was not to be. He felt pain lancing through the bond. Felt Kira's agony and the ghost of a Force signature he knew all too well. She was dying. Kira was being tortured to death and he wasn't there to save her. He wasn't there. All that came over the bond was agony. Jared shook with impotent fury. He didn't care that the dark side was surging all around him. All that mattered was Kira. The pain suddenly vanished, making him stagger. The bond was simply gone. Jared let out a wordless cry. His wife was dead. His heart tore apart between agony at the loss and sheer uncontrolled fury. The dark side embraced the Jedi Master. Its could touch soothed his burning fury. In desperation he turned to it and the dark side made the pain a distant thing. It left only the smoldering fury that did its best to suffocate him. Vale, Jared roared. The dark side responded to his emotions and everything around him shattered. The only reason the men on duty avoided that same fate was because they left when they felt things getting weird around their commander. =RK=. Chancellor's Office. Senate Building. Coruscant. Sidious was glad that his last visitor was escorted out by his personal assistant a minute ago, because when the dark side surged and got him off guard, something had changed. Again. The Chancellor wondered what Vale did this time. The dark side felt different. More potent. As if another shadow was cast upon it, compounding what Sidious and Vale did. The only silver lining was that once Palpatine accepted that the General was a real Sith, he knew what was the problem with divining the future. They were both casting shadows upon the Force and Palpatine wasn't sure how to account for that. At least it was much worse for the Jedi. Sidious grimaced. That other shadow. It was almost like another Sith Lord had revealed their presence, which was impossible, right? The Chancellor shook his head. He couldn't think like that. Believing that Vale's story was an impossible lie had gotten him in a lot of trouble, not to mention the missed opportunities. He had to keep an open mind and figure out what was happening this time. Instead of doing his usual routine, Palpatine decided to go to the source. He activated his terminal and placed an urgent call for Vale. While he waited, the Chancellor glanced at the stack of data pads he still had to go through. He glared at the unoffensive pieces of electronics and grabbed the closet one. The damn paperwork wasn't going to do itself. =RK=. The Room of Thousand Fountains. Jedi Temple. Coruscant. Yoda was meditating in peace and letting the gentle bubbling of the fountains soothe his frayed nerves. Dealing with Teen and his supporters was simply frustrating, and that conclusion was coming from a being who had almost a millennia to hone his patience to fine art. One of the few things he was glad for was the fact that Vale was away being Mandalore, and that gave the Grand Master a chance to try finding a compromise that didn't end with the Order torn apart. The ancient Jedi simply enjoyed the peace and quiet, letting his mind empty from all worries, when his brief respite was suddenly and rudely interrupted. He could clearly sense the dark side. It was boiling like a cauldron left on a strong fire for too long. The darkness shrouding the future became thicker, somehow deeper. The galaxy, darker is, Yoda whispered. Something had changed. Had Vale finally succumbed to the temptation of the dark side? Were the conservatives right after all? Or perhaps the blame laid with the Sith Lord who was behind the Clone Wars? Yoda was confused. Unsure how to proceed. How to interpret what he sensed. The Jedi Master's eyes widened. He had actually experienced something like this not so long ago. Just after Vale arrived from the past, the shadow over the Force had expanded greatly. This wasn't so different when Yoda examined the phenomena more carefully. Back the Sith are. The Grand Master repeated a fact he was painfully aware of for more than a decade now. He shouldn't be that surprised, Yoda decided. Always two, a master and an apprentice. That was something he had taken for granted. Something Yoda believed in without reservations. However, Vale's very presence changed things. Perhaps the Sith had decided that the rule of two had become obsolete and trained another one of their kind. Was this one of Vale's apprentices? That woman Arya? Was it the unknown Sith either replacing Dooku or simply having another powerful apprentice who chose to reveal themselves to anyone with the senses to hear it? Too many questions and not enough answers. Yoda sighed. He knew that no matter the truth, Vale was going to be blamed by a significant portion of the Jedi. Yoda wondered, was it worth it to defend the Sith of all people and continue doing his best to keep things from escalating until the war was over? What little peace was left in the room was disturbed when Master Piel walked in and headed straight towards Yoda. It begins. The ancient Jedi sighed and contemplated the merits of retiring somewhere quiet. Ancient Sith and Other Monsters. =RK=. Part 8. Captain's Quarters. Cruiser Remembrance. En route to Coruscant. Hyperspace. Apprentice, I need a drink. Like a whole bar worth of it. How did you manage to make such a mess? Zash groaned. She sighed and turned her attention to her brand new artificial hand and poked it with a finger. Blame the Jedi? My wife offered. For some arcane reason, Bo was still quite peeved with me. I blamed Zash for that. Oh, they usually find a way to be a pain in the nether regions. My former master nodded sagely. With my apprentice around, it's a good bet he has a lot to do with it too. She gave me a knowing look. I blame the Force. I can't have such a bad luck so consistently otherwise. I grumbled. Though it all balances in the end. I grinned at Kiera's body. Oh, Jared was going to go ballistic when he saw what I arranged for his wife. There was a dark part of me that hoped something of Kiera survived and was screaming deep below Zash's mind. I don't know. It could be just you. Zash shrugged. Let's make sure I understand how things are. She pointed at me. You, a Sith Lord and the newest Dark Council member, are now a general of the Republic Army. My former master giggled. Mandalore too. Bo objected. And that's no laughing matter. You make a good point, dear. However, being Mandalore is respectable. Zash offered a condescending smile and I wondered how long it was going to be before she pushed enough of my wife's buttons for a brawl to happen. However, joining the Republic of all things. Zash gave me a suspicious look. You haven't become a Jedi or something, right? I snorted in response. Ah, good. So, a Republic General, a net minus. A Mandalore, that's good. Making the Jedi look like blithering idiots, that's priceless. Zash nodded happily. I knew you would eventually grow up, apprentice. I'm proud of you. Bo actually laughed at my expression. I face-palmed again. It was an occupational hazard with Zash around. Now, I promised you answers, didn't I? Congratulations, apprentice. Your life is going to become even more of a holodrama. Zash announced gleefully. I already hate where this is going. I groaned. You certainly will. Zash became deadly serious. Griff. Good news first. I have it on the best authority that someone in the Jedi Order we both knew, had at least some idea that this, she waved between us, might somehow happen. Either that or they were half-arsing it as usually. You remember that fun first wife of yours? I sent a death glare at Zash who just ignored it. After she was killed, the Jedi had the great idea that they needed some kind of leverage against you, Zash continued. As if there was anything left that could stop me from killing them all. I frowned. Besides being criffed up by incompetent Sith with a super weapon. Oh, I know. That's why I suspect that someone was taking quite the long view. You remember Ashara's niece, don't you? She's been dead for a long, long time now. I might have been able to save her, but at the time I was too busy criffing up the Republic supporters on Alderaan, read the Organas and chasing a Jedi Master to care for anything else. Yep. The same. Zash beamed at me. My sources tell me she was actually frozen in carbonite and put on ice because thanks to Ashara her reliability has been under question and they wanted to keep the girl out of your clutches lest you found her and trained her as a Sith. What sources? I asked suspiciously. I should have wondered about that earlier in fact. You won't like it. Zash announced and began re-examining her prosthetic. I already don't. Spill. First my source, you know her, though lately she's been all transparent and glowing. Sattel Shan. Zash hummed to herself and looked at me as if I was her latest research subject. Shan? That bitch? Why the criff would you trust anything coming from her mouth? I shouted. The table between us crumbled when the dark side responded to my fury. Criffing Shan. You have history I take it? Bo inquired. I was too busy reciting the most vile Huttese curses I knew to answer. Meanwhile, Zash leaned towards my wife and mock whispered. Sattel Shan. She was the Jedi's Grandmaster back in the day. Ultimately it was her responsibility to stop something idiotic like an assassination or kidnapping attempt aimed at one of her Jedi and spearheaded by Jedi and Republic Special Forces. Once upon a time, my apprentice actually respected the woman after they fought on a few occasions to a draw. However, Zash shrugged. It's been 3,500 years and change. Do you really want me to believe that my niece has survived so long frozen in carbonite even if Shan isn't lying? I spat. Not only that, but I know she's been released a few years ago. Is this some kind of joke? I growled. I'm pretty sure we can blame the Force on this one. Zash nodded and became serious. Apprentice, think. Do you really believe it was a coincidence you survived being hit by that weapon above Korriban and conveniently sent to the future? Do you think that Gerard and company were simply lucky enough to suffer an accident too? I've got years to think about it. The Force has been doing its best to pull our strings. I don't know about you, but I'm no one's puppet, Zash hissed. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, then used a few mental exercises to put my rage under control. There is no luck. There's the criffing Force, I spat. You know, sometimes I think Kreia had the right idea. Apprentice, don't go all nihilistic on me. I've read the records. Darth Tyr is the personification of deception. Zash glared at me. Don't worry. I'm not going insane. Just criffing pissed off. Someone explain. Now. Bo grumbled. Short version? We're all like puppets on strings and it's the Force playing with us. What I don't know is the agenda it pursues. You're talking like the Force is alive. My wife frowned. I don't know about alive, though there are those who believe it, I said. Perhaps it is. What I know for sure is that the Force has an agenda of its own. It sometimes alters probabilities to make certain outcomes more likely. Figuring what it desires and if it would be beneficial to us is the trick. If now, well, there are ways to compensate if you're powerful enough and know enough about it. Zash smiled. Me and that husband of yours, we're kinda both. Well, I could cheat in that regard. I knew what was supposed to happen if neither of us were sent to the future. And if I had died with my plans unfulfilled. Order 66, Sidious Empire, Endor. Depending on how closely the future resembled the movies or the EU, I struggle to remember nowadays. Clean slate, I whispered. The Jedi are doing a splendid job in cutting their own throats. With Gerard around, I'll be seeing him and his people dead for what they did. That leaves us and the Sith of this era. What are the odds that when the dust settles we've killed each other off? The light side wants constant stability, lack of conflict, and what better way than removing both Jedi and Sith? And the dark side is all about conflict, about growing stronger and evolving through it. Zash slowly nodded. It's a decent theory, apprentice. Just don't get too attached to it in case it's not entirely correct. Why are you people always making things more complicated? My wife grumbled. At least you won't be bored with me around. I tried to soothe us. Bo glared and gave Ma one finger salute. Huh? So that was a thing nowadays. Don't worry, dear. He has such effect on people, but they'll grow accustomed to him in time. He isn't all bad. I've trained him well. Zash wigged her eyebrows at my wife. Do we really need that? Bo pointed at Zash. I'm beginning to wonder. So you have a niece? My wife changed the topic. I wouldn't say so unless I see her alive. I'm not trusting a word coming from Shan. I shook my head. That was the good news, apprentice. All traces of levity was gone from Zash's voice and suddenly she looked and felt like the powerful Sith Lord she was. I'm actually surprised you didn't have premonitions of what's about to happen. The only Force visions I had concerned you. That's the main reason why I didn't wait longer to come get you. By the time we're back, it will be less than a month before the Confederacy launches its offensive, I said. Crimson 71, Zash stated. No. Fuck no. I saw that thing burned. I torched a whole star system to make sure it was gone. I shook my head in denial. They couldn't have been this foolish. I glared at Zash. You were already on the council by that time. You knew what Crimson was. I rose to my feet. The compartment was coated in shadows as the dark side surged to feed on my fury. The biowarfare division kept a few samples on ice, in case we lost the war and needed to criff over the Republic as a parting gift. Zash shrugged. The Dark Council as a whole never believed that we could lose the war against the Republic, I snapped. No. Some feared that we would take ourselves apart and do the Republic's job for them. Which actually happened. Zash explained. It was a long time before I could gain enough control to stop cursing on every language I knew. What's Crimson? Bo asked. I take it, I'm not going to like the answer. She wasn't sounding amused, but I didn't really care by that point. Crimson? Imagine the nastiest bioweapon you can, make the damned thing sapient, able to use the Force, and you have vague idea what our bioweapon experts and one clearly deranged Sith Lord managed to cook up. It can twist living things to serve its purposes and has a limited capability to infest technology. All it wants is to spread and consume. Zash grumbled. It's actually much worse than it sounds. Trust me about that. If I had found where the samples were hid, I would have slipped the coordinates to my apprentice so he could go burn the damn thing. =RK=. Command Tower. Cruiser Remembrance. En route to Coruscant. Hyperspace. The moment I got myself under control, I went up to the former bridge and sat on the round. I closed my eyes and concentrated on bringing up some stuff I did my best to suppress, then began searching for it through the Force. I searched for an entity that was hunger manifested. The ceaseless need to consume and spread. And I hoped that for once Sash was mistaken. She wasn't. It was still weak. Just awakening from a long slumber. Yet, it was there, and I saw pulsing masses of tumor. Twisted, grotesque armored forms. Tentacles with claws, eyes and fang-filled maws. People screaming in agony as the plague consumed their very essence. The lucky ones were relegated to nutrition. The rest were damned to spend eternity as a part of living nightmare. I could feel the Force itself being slowly twisted, corrupted to serve the horror. And I could feel the dark side's satisfaction at the conflict to come. I drove deeper. Armored soldiers advancing through dark corridors, wearing the old clone armors which still haven't been phased out for most of the GAR. The hunger stirred. Containment was breached and I could feel its glee. It was beginning to slowly spread. It turned its attention towards me. Sensed I was seeking it and it roared in fury and recognition. The vision shattered and I was left panting on the floor. Criffit, I was going to murder the criff of whoever found Crimson and ordered the clones in there. =RK=. Part 9. Chancellor's Office. Senate Building. Coruscant. Palpatine carefully studied his visitors. After his absence, Vale was coming back shortly and had demanded this meeting. The Chancellor, the Grand Master of the Jedi and the highest-ranking GAR officers on Coruscant at the time of his arrival. If Palpatine didn't know better, and he checked through the Force for any immediate danger, the Sith Lord would have suspected treachery. What he found out was quite concerning nevertheless. If Yoda's expression was anything to go by, the Jedi Master had sensed it too. The Force itself was in turmoil. There was a threat on the horizon and it was growing. Sir, General Vale's ship just exited hyperspace. His transport immediately launched and is heading here. ETA 15 minutes. Palpatine's secretary announced over the comm. Thank you. Please show him in when he arrives. Palpatine spoke softly, then looked up to his guests. Any guesses? I haven't heard the good general sound so disturbed before. Sidious was genuinely curious. There weren't many things that could shake a Sith. Oh, it was possible Vale was making some kind of performance to achieve goals unknown, but every time Sidious examined the situation through the Force since the General contacted him about setting up this meeting, he got the same feeling. The other Sith was apprehensive, almost scared. Furious too. What Palpatine knew for sure, the only thing he knew for certain was that Vale was spooked by the threat he could feel. Was this the thing casting the new shadow he felt not so long ago? And to think that ever since Vale left Coruscant on that errand of his, things began to calm down. The only thing Vale asked me about was information concerning Republic units sent to recover artifacts from the Sith Empire he used to be a part of, Valentra said. Interesting. Palpatine muttered. He had tasked some ARC units to do precisely that when he couldn't find enough information about Vale in the Sith archives he possessed. Was the General concerned about what they could find about him? What did that have to do with the approaching danger? What was its nature? Sidious had tried to divine more about it. Unfortunately, the shadows across the Force prevented him from seeing anything of consequence. Yoda looked thoughtful. The tiny troll closed its eyes and Sidious was sure the Jedi was searching for something through the Force. The Sith very carefully made sure that his mask was intact and that he was giving nothing that could give him up as a Force sensitive, much less his true nature. Alone Vale is not. The Grand Master suddenly began looking all his years, ancient and frail. With him, another Sith is. Palpatine couldn't help it and grimaced. So it was Vale's fault after all. But bringing a Sith here? To meet both him, Yoda and the military's highest-ranking officers? Were they all deceived? Suddenly, Sidious felt uncomfortable. He had been so sure this meeting wasn't a trap. "Do you have any idea about General Vale's intentions?" Palpatine asked carefully. He made a great show of examining one of the shelves with gifts hanging on the wall to the left, where his lightsaber was hidden. "That's certainly unexpected." Valentra frowned. The general masked it well, but his surprise and unease were evident. Perhaps this was a good opportunity to undermine Vale's support among the army. Sidious smiled in his mind and began asking some leading questions. RK =. My fury only grew in the days wasted while we traveled back to Coruscant. If this had happened just a month ago, while I had the authority to command the whole Criffing Republic army, things would be different. Instead, the only naval forces I currently had were either still refitting and upgrading, with the exception of the cruiser that I took with me and the ships flown by my special forces. Of those, only Remembrance was going to be useful for the task at hand. That's why I bit the bullet, so to speak, and called the relevant people to meet me in Palpy's office, using both all the goodwill I had received so far as a general and my position as Mandalore. I was sure that at least Sidious would get nervous, wondering if I suddenly lost my mind and planned some kind of treachery. Serves the bastard right, I was almost certain that it was his brainchild to go poking where no one should. The shuttle shook as it tore through the atmosphere with its shield aglow from the friction. I had called a favor and we had a clear way to the Senate, complete with a fighter escort from the Remembrance. I had taken only Zash with me and sent Bo to the embassy so she could continue finding Mandalorian volunteers to replenish and expand my guard. Hopefully sooner than later she would have the opportunity to publicly distinguish herself in combat, so I could give her more authority without appearing that I did it just because she was great in bed. Anything less would be putting a great stain on our honor and be a huge pain in the ass to deal with. Which in turn meant that besides being my wife, Bo had no standing in the Republic. At least she got some amount of diplomatic immunity which could be useful in some circumstances. For once Sash had declined to needle me with her infernal tongue. All she supplied was that was sufficiently motivated for the meeting. Finally the shuttle landed and I couldn't get off fast enough. I hoped we still had time to contain Crimson. I seriously considered talking about it over the hypercom, but if information about it leaked to the Sis and they joined the party, the Force only knew bigger mess I would have to deal with. Even worse, Jared might hear about it and decide to come help get us all killed. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and always comes too damn late. Good, everyone's here. I announced the moment I entered Palpy's office. Once Zash stepped in behind me, I used the Force to seal the door. That little display got everyone's attention and I received a lot of wary looks. Yoda even looked ready to do battle if necessary. For a brief moment I wondered what Palpy has been doing while I was away, but dismissed it. Let's get the obvious out of the way first. Everyone, this is Darth Zash, my former master. I pointed my thumb at said woman. Zash, the Chancellor, Yoda, the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, General Valentra and Admiral Dao. General, you informed us you were out being Mandalore. I don't see how this, Palpatine nodded at Zash, has anything to do with those duties. He looked like a disappointed old man. Everything. I got information about the unknowns in power armor who engaged our troops on Naboo during the crisis about the Jedi younglings. I diverted to investigate and found some disturbing things. Lady Zash was one of them. Damn it, if it wasn't for Crimson hanging above all our heads I would have enjoyed this so much more. How is she here? Palpatine asked. Hyperspace accident, as far as I know. Zash interjected smoothly. Tisk. Are good manners dead in this age? She gave Palpy a withering look. Please be seated. He made good show of looking abashed. Why, thank you. I prefer to stand. What is of greater concern, I ignored Yoda's stare, is where I found Lady Zash and with whom. Well, if we were going to be consumed by a sapient bioweapon I could at least enjoy what time I had left. I looked at the Jedi and waited to be asked the obvious question. Palpatine gave me a disapproving look. Delkatar, get to the point, Talar snapped. Why, with the people who were behind our recent troubles on Naboo and Coruscant. As it turns out, I waved at my former master. Zash and me aren't the only ones from our time who found themselves in this bright future. I found her in a station run by old Republic forces using the same power armor like the people who engaged us on Naboo. I went to investigate, was engaged by the defenders and had to take the station the hard way. Unfortunately, before we could secure it, its commander activated a self-destruct sequence we were unable to stop. However, besides Lady Zash, we were able to recover a few prisoners and some data. Interrogations and what has been decrypted so far leads me to believe that the Old Republic people arrived here at least a few years ago, got one good look at the Republic and were disgusted by the corruption they saw. As a consequence, they decided that infiltrating the still-forming Confederacy would be a splendid idea, and once that was done, they did their best to escalate the war and see both states collapsing so they could rebuild the Old Republic as it was meant to be. Or some other insanity. The Criff? Dao asked. Oh, it gets better. They're led by a pair of dark Jedi. I had to engage and kill one of them during the boarding. Her husband won't be amused and might go for more attacks like Naboo. I smiled at Yoda. Unless I'm mistaken, people calling themselves Jedi nowadays are under your jurisdiction. If that's true, if those people are responsible for how bad things got lately, we actually might be able to seek accommodation with the Confederacy. At the very least we might be able to slow the beginning of their offensive and buy us more time. Palpatine spoke. You do have proof, right? I retrieved a data pad I had secured to my belt and levitated it to the Chancellor, who began to browse it. As we speak, a shuttle is bringing all the data my people retrieved to HQ. The slicers there should be able to crack it much faster. I offered. Well, my find answers a lot of questions. That wasn't why I called you here. It's a good enough reason for me. Valentra looked relieved. I take it there are some bad news too, right? There always are. Which one of you authorized Republic units to go after suspected Sith Empire facilities, and which of those units have been out of contact? I hissed, unable to be civil any longer. While being held by the Remnant, Zash had a lot of time to mediate. She sensed something disturbing in the Force, something I'm sure our Jedi friends are wondering about. I looked at Yoda. Can you feel it beyond the sense of approaching danger? The boundless hunger? The desire to consume everything? Danger I sense. Approaching it is. More cannot see. Yoda looked sad at the admission. New shadow over the Force is cast. He frowned at Zash. Hey, don't look at me, Jedi. I've been here longer than my old apprentice. You might try your Old Republic colleague. He probably went and embraced the dark side after Delcatar had to kill his wife in self-defense. At least Zash was more or less following the narrative. Oh. That's not going to go over well with the more conservative among our Jedi friends. Palpatine did his best to sound diplomatic. I was sure he was cackling inside, at least when he wasn't too busy going over the implications of Zash's presence. I wondered when he would try approaching her, before or after Tuil and company acted up. I found it amusing that no one really bat an eye when I announced that I had to fight and kill a Jedi, even if they were from the Old Republic. I guess there were some benefits coming from the conservatives being bloody idiots. This danger. Know it you do. Yoda's frown deepened. Check both surviving Jedi and Old Republic archives for Crimson 71. That was the most terrible thing cooked up by the Empire's biowarfare division, I hissed. Not a hyperbole, I take it? Dao asked. Once Zash told me what she suspected, I meditated. Searched through the Force. For someone who had faced that thing, it was obvious what to look for. And I found it. Crimson 71 is a sapient plague that infects, consumes and repurposes organic entities. It has a limited ability to infect technology too. Depending on its spread and how many infected forms it has at its disposal, its ability to use the Force grows. I smiled thinly at Palpatine. It evolves the Gestalt nodes that enhance its Force-related abilities. As it gets stronger, it is able to produce more advanced forms, not merely modified infected, which are bad enough. All it desires is to feed, consume and spread. It is highly intelligent, unable to be controlled or reasoned with. If not contained, we're looking at a galaxy-wide extinction event. How does it spread? Valentra asked after taking a moment to digest the information. Bite wounds caused by the infected, contact with infected bodily fluids, and it's also airborne. Thanks to its access to the Force, biohazard gear isn't really useful. Anything less than completely sealed armored suits with integrated air supply would be compromised in short order, I stated flatly. Being sapient and having control over all his forms through the Force, the accursed thing is always trying to spread. If it hits a major world before we can contain and eliminate it, we might as well kiss the galaxy goodbye. That's nasty piece of work. Dow groaned. Who in their right mind would create such a thing? Many things could be said about the Imperial Biowarfare Division and the Sith who ran it before Crimson got free and we had to purge it. Sane or in their right minds wouldn't be among the terms I would have used. Zash smiled. I'll ask again, who send Republic soldiers to seek old Imperial facilities? Which units aren't responding and where were they headed? It certainly wasn't me. Valentra shook his head. I stared at the Chancellor. Ahem. I might have authorized a few expeditions towards suspected locations of Imperial facilities. It was to find some unbiased information about General Vale and try preventing any nasty surprises from popping up. As today's events show, things and people from that time period continued to turn up at most unexpected times and places. Which units aren't responding or have missed a report? I seethed. I wondered the merits of trying to kill Sidious right here and now and damn the consequences. I'll have to check. Any facility containing samples of Crimson 71 would have been deep in the unknown regions. Zash supplied. May I respectfully suggest that you do precisely that, right now? Sir? I ground my teeth and tried to keep my voice level. Strangling Palpatine right now may prove counterproductive. I glanced back at Yoda, while the Chancellor began to furiously type on his terminal. What assets would you need to contain that thing? Valentra asked. A fleet with enough firepower to sterilize a whole star system. Volunteers for suicide missions if that turns out not to be practical for one reason or another. Enough ordnance to level a continent or two just in case. I examined the Jedi Master through the Force. He was seeking confirmation of my words. And apparently he found it now that he knew what he was looking for. Yoda's tiny frame shook and he recoiled like he was shocked by a jolt of lightning. His eyes snapped open and were bloodshot. I could clearly see the shock in them. Find what you were looking for, didn't you? Zash shook her head. Our pet horror has such an effect. It's much worse when it's actually close by or it had a whole populated planet to toy with. Yoda shuddered and gasped. Hunger. No death. No mercy. Consume. The Jedi Master panted. The damn thing is awake. It wasn't when I checked last night. I closed my eyes and sent my mind searching. The Force itself felt like a disturbed ocean and there were echoes through it. A presence that was now aware. It sensed I was seeking it and it sent a wordless roar of fury and the promise of never-ending agony. I'll need those coordinates right now and everything you can spare. I told Palpatine and Valentra. I'm working on it. So far everything I checked seems to be in order, Sidious said without looking up. What about you, Lady Zash? What do you intend to do now? Me? It seems that working for the Republic has turned all right for my former apprentice, and that's telling considering in how much trouble he tends to get into. So I thought it might be a splendid idea to offer you my services. The Jedi were going to love that, though I was beyond caring. All I needed from them was not to criff up until the Sis offensive was blunted. After that, I planned to eliminate the distraction that the Conservatives provided. That was vital, because if Jared kept himself somewhat reasonable, they were his natural allies as far as my elimination was concerned. Elements of the Coruscant Defense Fleet and depending where you need to go, I'll authorize you to pick up more units on the way there, Valentra stated. Options if you can't get there before containment is lost. Work closely with the Jedi, they will have a chance to divine where the damned thing is headed. If it spreads to an inhabited world, put it under quarantine and kill anything that tries to break atmosphere. Glass the whole damn continent. Boil an ocean depending on where it lands. If that looks not to be working, sterilize the world. At any rate the place will have to be under strict quarantine for years to make sure. I took a deep breath. Anything less and we're all dead. Speak the truth, you do. Yoda muttered. He was looking a bit better. Touch the intelligence I did. Consume us all it will. Peace and death we will find not. Stopped it must be. I think I got it. One unit hasn't reported. Unknown regions, an unremarkable system, just some asteroids with no resources to speak of and a small planetoid. A good place to hide something. Zash nodded. How long ago you lost contact? I asked. It was scheduled for last night. If we're lucky, the ship or ships used will have transponder or transponders which are still working. If that thing goes anywhere we have a presence, it has to be destroyed on sight, I said. About those ships you can give me? I asked Valentra.